This episode of the Better 2 podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and DM Needom, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Hi, gang. Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better 2 podcast. My guest today is Lois Wagner. She is the author of Walking Without Skin, a journey of healing from fear to forgiveness to freedom. Lois was working one evening by herself when someone scaled a wall and came up behind her and attacked her with a screwdriver. He stabbed her several times before he raped her. She experienced both fighting back and the freeze that we often hear about. However, as traumatic as this experience was, it turned her into becoming an advocate. And that advocacy taught her a lot about who she was. It also taught her that she had to eventually not only face her emotions about the attack, but 14 years after the fact, she would face her attacker in a court. And when she faced him, the one thing that she gained was forgiveness. She forgave him, and in doing so, she freed herself. We talk about that moment. We also talk about how she helps young men and women learn about consent and learn about how to navigate a relationship so these things won't happen again. Instead of trying to stop what's going on completely, let's start re-education. That is what she's doing. So I hope you take something from the episode. And if rape is a trigger for you, then maybe you don't want to listen. But I think ultimately there's some good information about healing, moving forward, and learning how to be an advocate. Enjoy. Hi, Lois. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks very much, Donna. And you?
I'm doing good. So you are currently located where exactly?
In Johannesburg, South Africa.
Are you originally from South Africa?
I am indeed from Johannesburg.
Okay. So most of what has happened and what we're going to talk about today took place in Johannesburg, correct?
No, it actually took place in Cape Town.
Okay.
I moved to Cape Town from Johannesburg when I was around 40 years old.
And then you decided to move back?
No, that's another story altogether.
Okay.
I left Cape Town to go to the Middle East, and then the Middle East wouldn't renew my work visa when I hit 64 years old, so I was forced to come home.
Okay. Wow. So you definitely have an interesting story. So let's go back to you being in Cape Town and what exactly happened in Cape Town to you?
Well, I moved down to Cape Town on a whim, I suppose, and I didn't have a job when I got there, and I started marketing consulting. And one of my clients, I did some research for him and then went into business with him, into a digital printing business. And this was in the days when digital printing was still a brand new thing and people didn't even have color printers. So it was a really novel idea. And we started a little shop, and we had been in business 2 years. And I was working late one night in the little courtyard of our business, and a man scaled the wall and brutally attacked me. And I fought him with all the power that I had, but unfortunately I lost. He raped me, he tied me up and left me to bleed to death.
Wow. So did somebody find you? I mean, obviously so.
Yeah, I had quite a bit of presence of mind. He broke a glass and he came at me with a glass, and I managed to keep a piece of the glass. And so when he left, I managed to cut myself free.
Good. Now, did they actually, I take it you went to hospital afterwards and were taken care of by doctors and everything. How, and I know this is hard to talk about, so I apologize if you don't want to talk about it, just,
That's fine. It's fine.
So what kind of injury did you sustain from this besides the sexual injury?
His weapon was a screwdriver, so he stabbed me numerous times, but the biggest damage was my teeth, my mouth, my ears, my throat. I had many, many stab wounds around my head region.
How long did it take to recover from this? And have you, I mean, I know there's the physical injury. That's basically what I'm speaking of, because the mental injury is there for quite a while, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating story, because I was so angry, as you can well imagine. But also remember, this happened long before the Me Too movement, and the word rape was never discussed in polite circles. It was just a taboo topic. And of course, that this had happened to me made me, other than the injuries and all the other emotional stuff, angry, just so angry that this would happen. And everybody was so shocked and surprised. So I almost immediately, as soon as I was physically able, I became an activist. And I marched in the streets, and I lobbied, and I petitioned. It was at a time where South Africa was coming out of apartheid, and they were putting a new constitution together. And so I was going to make a change to the constitution, because the man who raped me was out on bail for rape.
Wow.
And I wanted to change the law.
And that's not something that's uncommon, is that a lot of the time the rapist, the serial rapist, is somebody who is out on bail.
And it's very common in this country. This justice system just doesn't work well enough.
I had a gentleman that had a farm in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, and basically they decided that, we don't want anybody to have private farming anymore. So you have a choice. We either take your farm or we kill you, and so he fled. But he talked about how basically the police there would take cash to get you out of jail off the books. So it has been discussed on here before about the fact that the policing system over there is not necessarily the proper policing system.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, it's not so much the policing system in here. I think it's just more the justice system, because I think the police end up arresting the same guys over and over again. So I think they're doing a pretty good job.
It's just the fact that justice is not being prevailed.
No.
So you obviously faced your accuser, from what I had read, and you were willing to. How hard was it to look at this person in the face and face what he did?
It was 14 years later. He was given a 25-year prison sentence. So it was 14 years later, and it was just the universe had spoken to me. I was living in the Middle East. I'd been away for a year, and I was coming back for my first holiday. And in those 14 years, I'd never once inquired or tried to find out his status. But for some reason, I decided to find out if he was still in jail. And because, they release people for so many reasons. So I'd never bothered, but now I've tried to find out. And I received this information that he was coming up for parole the day after I arrived in the country. And in addition, the law had just changed, allowing what they call victims of serious crime to attend parole hearings. So the universe had spoken and said, you got to go.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't too sure what I was going to be talking to him about, if at all. I certainly didn't want restitution or any of that. And then somebody advised me to forgive. And so I did some research, and I prepared a speech just in case, not really believing that I would. And I went into the prison, and it's amazing. I didn't feel much. It was just, I think I was more curious about the process than anything else at the time. And when they asked me if I had anything to say, I said yes, and I pulled out my speech and I started reading it. And it was a little bit too academic, even for me. And he had a great sixth education, and English was not his first language. So I ended up just saying to him, I compassionately and completely forgive you, and I take the responsibility from my higher self and I give it to your higher self, and I take back my power. And yeah, it was, I've still not been able to put this in words, my feeling at that time. The authorities said to me they would let me know in 7 days if he got parole or not. And I just said, no, I don't need to know. I don't want to know, because by forgiving, I had actually broken that bond that had kept me tied to him for those 14 years. The forgiveness just snapped that bond and it set me completely free. And since that day, I've never been triggered. I've never had any bad feelings. I was totally, totally free of the situation and the person.
But let's go back during that 14 years. I mean, from the time of the attack to that moment, how much did this affect your relationships? How much did it affect you personally? I mean, were there a lot of triggers that came up for you? And were you able to have a successful relationship?
Now, there were lots of things that happened. The first thing that happened was that I lost the business. My business partner, I didn't want to be there anymore. And my business partner agreed to buy me out, but he didn't. He betrayed me. And so we lost the business. I went deep into debt that took me a long, long time to recover from. And so that was another, I even said to the business partner at the time, I think I've been raped twice. The first one was by a stranger and the second one was by somebody I respected. So it was really hard, and I had to go then back into the corporate world, get a job, start all over again. And so it was a tough time generally. And then 2 years later, I one day just couldn't get out of bed. My legs and back were just not functioning. X-rays and MRI scans and what have you. I was told that I had to have a back operation, which I had. I had a second back operation. They both failed. I was sent home. I was bedridden for 6 months. And it was so interesting because it was pointed out to me that I had not faced my problems. I hadn't faced the trauma of what happened to me, because I was an activist and I was out there changing the world and lobbying and being so active. And everybody was saying to me, you're so strong, you're so brave, we're so proud of you, you're so wonderful, you're so strong, you're so strong. And so what was happening, I wasn't facing my problems. I was putting them behind me and putting them behind me until eventually my back said, I can't carry this anymore. And my back collapsed. And I lay in bed and it was wonderful. I could just be weak and I didn't have to be strong anymore. And so why get better? And the surgeon had told me that I would never hike or scuba dive again, which were my two passions, because I could never carry anything on my back. So after I came to that realization, I did some inner work, I did meditation, I went for 8 chiropractic treatments, and I did a 5-day hiking trail with a 29-kilogram backpack on my back.
Nice. So, I mean, that's something that I've taught to other people about, that sometimes our mental trauma manifests in a physical sense. And most people don't see that, but it's true. I mean, what you're putting in there in your mind can take different ways to manifest. And in your case, yeah.
Yeah. So that was one thing. And then you talk about relationships. I had a sort of a long distance boyfriend at the time. I hadn't seen him. He wasn't around when it happened. And when he came back, we got quite passionate. And when it came to the actual act of sex, I couldn't do it. And so I then told him why. He didn't know that this had happened to me. And he left and I never saw him again. So that was tough. But I did find a lover who was very kind and considerate and helped me through it. So
I think, that's being a survivor of rape. There's a lot of different ways people handle it. Some people, they can't do it. They cannot have that act for a long time. And then there's other people that become very promiscuous. I mean, there's we see in the media, the victim plays the part of locking themselves in their bedroom, not being the advocate, but locking themselves away and not wanting to face anything. And that's the general role that we see. We don't see the other traumas that, the other role that I want to have this passionate relationship, but I can't go there because I need somebody that's going to be able to be nurturing and caring to get me past that. Or the woman that just basically says, okay, I'm done. It's fine. I can keep on. It was an act. It was nothing. There are people that, Debbie Harry talks about that. Debbie Harry from Blondie, that she was raped and she was more concerned about the equipment that they stole from the apartment than what the guy did. So it's a topic that it affects a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. I'm glad that you found another partner that was willing to be compassionate in the sense that you needed, because it's a very tough thing.
And the new lover, he knew exactly what had happened, and so he was very patient at first, and we had a good time.
Well, and I mean, sometimes the fact is when you tell somebody that has occurred, I'm sure they look at you as damaged. Do they not? And it's hard to have a regular relationship if somebody's looking at you as, dare I say, faulty from the start.
Yeah. No, I don't think, other than that very first occasion, I didn't have any problems. I never faced any judgment or any opinions that were negative. So it was okay. Good.
So looking at some of the stuff that you had written about, you now try to teach boys about and men to be brave, but to remove toxic masculinity. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, when I got back to South Africa at age 64, I thought, can I get back into the corporate world? Because I was a corporate trainer and coach. And I thought, 64 now, to go and start again with all the youngsters who are already well established in the industry. So I decided to finally, because this thought came right back, I became an activist straight away, wanting to change the world. So I thought, well, now it's time to finally bring that home. And so I decided to become a life coach rather than a corporate or an executive coach, and start coaching women, helping them heal from their trauma. And then one day I just thought, why am I helping women heal? It shouldn't happen in the first place. And so I still help, but I now have changed my emphasis is more on what can we do to eradicate toxic masculinity, harassment, bullying, gender-based violence, domestic violence. So I came up with the concept of brave because, for years and years, we've been teaching boys not to rape, men not to rape, and it doesn't work because they still rape. And so I thought, let's go forward in a positive way rather, and let's teach boys and men and girls and women, because girls and women can be just as toxic, and teach them to be brave. And I came up with the acronym B is for boundaries setting, and knowing your boundaries, knowing the boundaries of your partner and the people around you, and also bystander, about not being a bystander, about taking action when you see something that's not right. The R is about respect, understanding what those boundaries are and then respecting them. The A is agreement, consent. It's an obvious one. It's also being alert to what is happening around you. The V is your values and your vulnerability and your voice. Speak up, speak out, share your story. You don't have to share it as publicly as I do, but share it, speak to somebody. And then the E is about equality and empowerment. So that is my intention, is to bring that to the world so that we just have better quality behaviors in the world.
And it's important. And what you said about women needing to learn, there was a case in the news that happened this weekend and it happened in a town here in Illinois, that apparently this lady, who is the mother of 3 kids, moved in with a couple, allegedly. These are all allegations. And apparently they had been drinking, and the woman said to the man, "Kiss me," in front of the other girl. And he said no, and he kissed his girlfriend. And the girl reached, this should tell you something, she reached into the cushions of the couch where there was a gun. And she took the safety off and she said, "Kiss me." And he said no. So she shot him dead.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so now, because for whatever reason you wanted this kiss, which goes back to boundaries, and he did not want to acquiesce, now your kids have no family. They have no mother. And he's dead. So, and the reason why I bring this up is because women are just as guilty sometimes of not knowing those boundaries.
Absolutely. We had a case here a couple of months ago where a schoolgirl, a male principal, had taken her cell phone away. So she grabbed him by his manly parts.
Wow.
And a schoolgirl. It's just horrendous.
Well, I mean,
it's women. No, just saying, women can be just as evil and as toxic.
And I think that's something that has come up in the media a little bit, and I don't really want to weigh into and I don't even know if you're familiar with it, but there's a situation between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And this started years ago, and she alleged abuse. And apparently now the dare I say, the pendulum has swung to the other side, and there's evidence that she's been the abuser. I'm not stating that for a fact. These are allegations. So I want to clear that up before anybody says, well, it's allegations. But the whole fact of the matter is, just because you hear something, one version of the story, doesn't mean that's a full version of the story. And you can't always say based on sex, based on a person's, whether they're male or female or whatever their gender is, you can't say that they're innocent because they're that. And I'm not defending men, and I think rape is rape no matter what, but a woman can rape a guy just as much as a man can. And I know that some people would tell me I'm wrong, but a girl can roofie a guy and take advantage just as much.
Absolutely. And remember, it's just a muscle. And so that muscle can get hard, even though in his mind he doesn't want it to. So, yeah, it can be done.
I mean, there was another guest I talked to recently. She's in Zimbabwe, and she was talking about the fact over there that people marry off their daughters for, the wrong reasons to much, much older men. And she said it started out with her grandfather. So, I mean, there's something else that it's not rape, but it's once again an older person taking advantage of a situation for somebody that's weaker. And is that not really, when you look deep down, is that not really why people rape? Is because it's about power?
I believe it's about power because men can get it off so many ways. There's prostitutes, there's a hand, there's always somebody who's willing. So there's no need to rape. They can always get their jollies off somehow. So it is about the power.
And, for you to face people, and then let me ask you this: when you're teaching people now, when you're being the coach, especially to guys, have you explained to them your situation and your history? Are they well aware of where you've coming from?
I share it very openly because I think if people can hear the story, it makes them more compassionate and understanding, and they really listen more deeply, and they take it in, and they remember things more when you can relate it to a real incident.
Yeah, because otherwise it's like, well, you don't really know, but you do know, and that's the thing. I mean, when someone sits there and says, well, I can say this because I watched it on TV. Did you really experience it? Do you know what it feels like? Do you know what it? I mean, I can sit here and I can ask you the conversation about and imagine what the trauma of being attacked was like. But I wasn't there, so my experience is not going to be the same as you. I mean, I had someone that was, my stepfather. He did not rape me, but my stepfather and I had gotten into an altercation once, and it took me a long time for my mind to actually say that basically he had tried to kill me, because I mouthed off and said something that I shouldn't have said to him. He got up from the chair and came at me and forced me up against the wall in a hall and put his hands around my neck. He wasn't doing it to bake me a cake. He wasn't doing it to give me a hug. He was trying, but it took my mind, I was 21 at the time. It took my mind until I was in my 40s to come to the realization that he was trying to kill you. It wasn't just a physical altercation. He tried to kill you.
Yeah.
But, and that's the thing about your situation too. I mean, your mind tries to protect you at a certain extent. So it's not surprising really that you put on the armor of, I'm going to fight this and I'm going to be big and strong, because that was your mind in a way protecting you. Was it not?
I just think I was so angry that I wanted to make a difference. I was just so angry. But, it's also, even though I can share my story and you can share your story, everybody's situation is completely different. The next person who's attacked, they have a different experience. They have a totally different response. We talk about the freeze, the fight, flight, or freeze response. I fought. At one point, I froze. When he came at me with the broken glass to my stomach. That's when I froze. I just thought, I can't fight anymore. I must just, because he's going to kill me. And so I froze. So we go through different reactions, and no two reactions are the same. And no one reaction is better or worse than the other. You do what you can in that moment. So even though I'm sharing my story, it's different for each person. Each person experiences it differently.
So when did you decide you were going to write a book about it? Was it after you finally forgave him, or was that something that you had always thought in the back of your head, I'm going to do this?
That very night.
Okay.
That very night. I just thought, because it wasn't spoken about. We had one case in South Africa, which was a dreadful, dreadful case, where this woman had been attacked by two Satanists, and they had cut her, they'd stabbed her something like 36 times in her stomach. They had cut her neck literally from ear to ear and left her to dead on a beach. And she crawled, she held her head up like this and held her innards inside, and she crawled, I forget now, a kilometer, and was finally, and of course she was headline news, because it was such an atrocious story. And other than her, nobody ever spoke about it. It just wasn't heard about, but her story was so extreme that I just, when it happened to me, I just thought, I've got to get it out there that this happens. It doesn't only happen in those extreme Satanistic cases. It happens by just ordinary horrible men on the street, Yeah. And so I started writing a journal that night with every intention of publishing, but it took me 24 years to publish.
Hey, my first book took me 30 years, so I understand. I think, and then there's the whole argument that you have people going, well, it's about the way you're dressed. No, because I'm pretty sure rape has been going on since people were dressed up to their chins, down to their toes. It's not something about the way a person dresses. It's kind of, I mean, I don't know about there, but here, going back to the toxic masculinity, if a girl's drunk and you take advantage, well, that's just fine. It's been accepted for so many years, and it's like, that's not the case.
Well, It's people have such, well, it's changing now. It's definitely since the Me Too movement, people are so much more aware of that it's a man's issue and it's not a woman's issue anymore. It used to be a woman's issue. Now it's definitely it's a man's responsibility. And so mindsets are changing. There are so many activists and groups around the world who are fighting this gender-based violence.
And, as I said before, I'm not trying to say that it's all men, because there are a few women. I'm not going to say, because I don't want somebody to come back and say, well, it's two women just bashing men. No, it's just if you look at the statistics, this is really a man thing. It really is. It is gender biased more toward men. However, there are some women that are just as capable.
And also, there are more good men than there are bad men. And the downside of the Me Too movement, and I really think that maybe it's going a little bit too far, this Me Too movement, because I like a man to give me a hug, and men are now so scared to even look at a woman, let alone touch her. And, I think it's just out of control, I think. And a lot of women are accusing, and, one must believe a woman when she says something has happened. But I just wonder how many women are taking advantage of this situation.
Well, being that I write romance occasionally, my books are set in the 80s, I look at this because I'm not putting in my book about consent, because let's be honest, in the 80s, you didn't have somebody come up to you and say, is it okay if I kiss you? It wasn't that you wrote about, or you, back then, if somebody wanted to kiss you, they kissed you. That was it. If you were going to if you guys were going to have sex, you guys were going to have sex. So, how does that look? Do you sit there now and go, well, wait a second, I like you. Can I kiss you? Okay, that's fine. But are you taking yourself completely out of the moment of that unbridled passion if you have to sit there and look at somebody and go, well, I really like you a lot. Can this proceed next? Can we go to the next step? And then do you have to stop? And I know I can get blasted for this, but how does this look? How does this really look? Because are you taking the intimacy out of being intimate? Because now everything has to be a transaction. And then one comes a day that a guy says, hey, can I videotape this so I can make sure we have consent in case it comes back to haunt me? And then if you break up, it ends up on Pornhub or something. I mean, I know this sounds like a really crazy thought, but when do guys start saying, okay, well, then let's sign a contract before we get intimate?
But that's why in The Brave, it's about the boundaries. When you start a relationship, right up front, let's talk about our boundaries. I'm not ready for sex. I'm ready for oral sex. Just to have it so that when the passionate moment comes, you know what the boundaries are, and you don't go beyond that boundary. You don't have to say, must I stop now? I must stop because you know what the boundary is. So that's so it's a difficult one to navigate. It really is, but I do think it's yeah. I mean, I'm advocating for women's rights all the way, and yet I'm saying maybe the Me Too movement has just gone a little bit out of hand.
Well, but that's what I'm saying is, so what you're saying makes perfect sense about having that conversation up front, makes perfect sense. But at what point do men say, we need to have this all clear cut? And because there's been cases where you have a guy saying, well, we went back to my apartment, we got naked, we had been drinking, and then she decided that she didn't want to do this. And now she's claiming rape, and we didn't even actually get that far. So when does a guy, and I'm not trying to defend men, but I'm just saying, when does a man decide that, okay, well, you're coming to my apartment, I need you to fill this form out that you're here willingly, or I need you to film this and say that you're here willingly, so that way it's all covered. I mean, when do we get to that point that everything's going to be transactional? I mean, sex can be transactional, don't get me wrong, if you're into that. But in a way, it's still a transaction because you're you're using energy. You're both sharing energy. But at what point does I have to protect myself?
No, date rape, it's a he said, she said, and will you ever really get to the truth behind what happened?
Right.
It's somebody's word against somebody else's. We just had a case the other day here in South Africa where a man raped a girlfriend. They were dating, and they had agreed to have oral sex, and then she said she wanted to remain a virgin, and he knew that. And then he penetrated her, and she asked him to stop, and he didn't. Anyway, he was convicted. He was found guilty of rape because he said he knew that she didn't want it. Anyway, they've overruled it now. He was first given 7 years prison, and now they've overruled it, and he's been set free. So there's such an outcry on both sides. It's a mess. It's a real mess. How do you navigate that? How do you negotiate that? I don't know. In my mind, it was rape because she had specified and he had agreed, and he admitted to that. But again, they were in the passion of the moment, and he got carried away, and he didn't stop. So
it's one of those things, but it's still, I mean, technically that is rape. If she did not want it, then
yeah,
that is rape. And that's the very gray area that if you are in the middle, if you get to that point where you're in the act and you decide I don't want to do it and he doesn't stop, is that not rape? And it's a court of law. And that's the other big caveat, especially like over here in the court of law, if you're dealing with a male judge, depending on, I mean, we had the Brock Turner case where this girl was so drunk, she was unconscious, and he took her behind a dumpster and raped her.
I remember that.
And the judge's perspective was, well, we don't want to ruin his life. What about ruining hers? I mean,
that was a horrific result. It was a terrible outcome.
So, I mean, it's such a weird area. And that's why I said, some people are going to sit there and say, well, you're definitely pro man. No, I'm not. It's just the Me Too movement with anything. And this is with anything in life. We usually swing one way with the pendulum, and it's so drastic that we end up swinging back the other way because we're trying to counterbalance, and it ends up just one extreme to the other. And we need to really just find some middle common ground.
Yeah.
And hopefully you teaching, men and women about boundaries and empathy and those things and consent. Consent doesn't have to be so black and white and contractual. Consent can be an open conversation.
That's why I've got the V of the voice in V. It's about talking, sharing. So when you set those boundaries, when you say, this is how I want you to respect me, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it in the early phases of a relationship. There's always the occasion where you go to a pub and you drink too much and you pick up somebody and you go home with them, which is different. But in a relationship, you can talk about it way before it gets to a point where you're going to have a point of difference and an argument or a disagreement on it.
I do have this is going to sound like a weird question, but in your counseling sessions, have you ever had anybody ask about filming people? Because, I mean, that's a whole nother consent thing that it may be fine at the time that you have this film the act, but what happens if the relationship ends?
I haven't had that, no, but I do know just generally, especially with school kids, they take photos wherever they can and they send it around, and it's horrendous how, with social media today, those pictures get out there so quickly. But no, I've not dealt with anyone who's had that problem.
I mean, social media has, that's the whole thing. It's like, for me, I'm suddenly, oh, I'm going on 17 years now, that since I've dated anybody, because I was married for 16. And it's like, now it's like, I don't even know what the dating pool looks like, because it's changed so much in that time.
Just going back to your film, she wasn't a client of mine, but she was somebody I interviewed for a summit that I ran. There was this young lady who had been gang raped, and they'd filmed her, and her video got onto Pornhub or whatever that porn site is called, and she's been fighting it for years to get it taken off. And that's another whole can of worms. I mean, she never gave consent, and yet she's on a porn site. Just dreadful.
And there's no way, there's no way you can take it down. Somebody's making money off of this, possibly, and it's there to haunt you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So she's been a bit of an activist, try to change the whole porn rules. I'm not quite sure what her progress is now. It was about a year ago that I spoke to her. But I think she was making some inroads.
And I mean, once again, it goes back to how do we change these things? I mean, there's certain parameters that our technology develops that affects us more and more each day. Mm. Your the right of privacy. What used to be able to stay in the bedroom unless you had a VHS camera, now they can hide a camera and you wouldn't even know.
Yeah. What I find interesting as well is I've come across quite a number of men's groups that are talking about let's stop pornography, which is really encouraging to see, that they're saying let's do something about pornography because pornography degrades women.
Well, and there was another person I had talked to a while ago who was talking about the statistics of porn, and that 8-year-old boys are looking at porn, and this is setting them up for this. While girls have Disney princesses, boys are looking at porn, and this is setting up that a woman is supposed to look like this, and this is what we're supposed to be doing. And it's really sending the wrong message, because not every woman is going to look this way. And I remember, and this is rather too much detail most likely, but I remember my first husband telling me one point, he's like, well, you don't have a Playboy one. What exactly does that even mean? And like he's some kind of stellar hunk, but why would you say that, number one, to your future wife? And number two, why would you say that, period? It's all airbrushed. It's not real. So why would you say that?
And you still married him after you said that?
He had 2 wonderful kids that I would love deeply. I will say that is really why I married him, was because I love those girls. And yeah, I look back and go, yeah, no. I there was no reason I should have married him, but I was 22 at the time. And I was not, somebody loved me. But it was more about the kids, honestly. It was. But yeah, I mean, but here's the whole point of the story was, so if a grown man is telling me this in the early 90s, now we have kids watching porn. So when does a boy look at a girl in high school and tell her, well, you don't look like the chick that was, full of silicone that I saw in this movie?
Yeah. And it's just, you're an author. Change the story.
I'm an author, but I'm an author that's writing in the 80s. So I'm still allowing myself the liberation of not having, and I write about people in Hollywood and actors and singers. And the fact is, I have the luxury of not dealing with technology. I have the luxury of, yes, there's paparazzi, but it's not like right then and there hitting the internet as soon as it happens. That's why I wrote in the 80s, because it allows me that luxury of, I don't want to say innocence, because they're still bad and they still have bad habits, but it's not as in your face as you can't get away from it now. And that's the thing. Now you say one thing and it's taken out of context, and suddenly, even though you didn't say it that way, it is now out there in the media being portrayed that you said it that way. It's a pretty weird time we live in. And yeah, I would like to change the narrative. And in fact, there is a situation with one of the main characters that she has been molested by her stepfather. So there is that issue, and her I take her from 18 years old further into her life, and the fact that she has to deal with these traumas and how she handles them. So it's not an easy thing.
No, it's not. But, there's so many therapies and treatments and solutions out there. And I just say to people, first of all, know that you're not alone. There is somebody. You don't have to go to a therapist. You don't have to go to a healer, but you need to find somebody to talk to. You can get help. You can get support. There's hundreds of different therapies. And if one doesn't work for you, find another one. And go manage your trauma immediately. You're not like me. It took me 2 years and a lot of pain and suffering. So you need to deal with the emotions. The incident, I think the biggest problem is people keep your emotions locked to the incident. You've got to divorce the two. You've got to say that happened. I can't change what happened, but let's work with how I'm feeling about what happened. And that's the biggest advice I can give anybody, is just to start healing immediately. Don't let it build up until something else forces you to deal with it.
And it will. It will. I have no doubt. I mean, there are many people who, they think, well, my trauma is not that bad because I wasn't raped. I wasn't attacked. But if your trauma of your daily living, if you're constantly living in stress, that's a trauma in itself. It may not be as drastic as being attacked, but if it's eating at you and taking you physically down, then that's still a problem, and that's still a trauma, and you still need help.
And the trauma doesn't even have to be anything physical. I mean, you can be traumatized from childhood because your parents were never at home. Mm-hmm. That's trauma. There's just so many different types of trauma, and you need to deal with it. So
I think, going along with that, there's a lot of cases now where parents are so worried about providing what they think a kid needs. And sometimes that means working 2 jobs. Sometimes that means working a job and mom's working a job, dad's working a job, and the kid's in all these other activities. But when is the time for family? And when is the time to actually, and I'm meaning that for even the parents, when is there a time to actually stop, breathe, and not be part of the daily stress, to appreciate life?
And just to connect.
Yeah.
Just to connect. It's so important to make that time. And of course, my big thing is forgiveness. I've got a thing that everybody these days keeps a gratitude journal. It's become a thing. Everyone has a gratitude journal. And I'm saying, well, let's also keep a forgiveness journal. So every day, 3 things to forgive yourself for. So I forgive myself for pushing the snooze button. I forgive myself for shouting at the dog when the dog ate my slipper. And I forgive myself for burning the toast. Little things that you think, they don't need forgiveness. They just happen. And then 3 things that you forgive somebody else for. My friend for not phoning me on my birthday. The dog for chewing my slipper. The husband for not bringing the milk home. 3 little simple things every day. And forgiveness is like a muscle. So you work on that every day. And, if you think about it, you're walking down the street and you bump into somebody. What happens? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, it's okay. What has happened? You've apologized and you've forgiven. So we do it all the time anyway. But if we make it a conscious habit of learning to forgive all those little, what we may think as insignificant things, you're building a muscle. You're building a muscle that is giving you the ability to forgive more easily. So, and to understand that forgiveness is not condoning what the other person did. It's not saying my dog shouldn't get a hiding for eating my slipper. Okay, it's not saying it's okay, but it's saying that I'm not going to let that bother me anymore. You breaking yourself free from that situation. So I'm a great advocate of practicing forgiveness every single day.
I think it's a very important thing, because I think too many times we make a choice and we may not be happy with it. And this goes back to something that I talked to somebody recently about: perfectionism. We bound ourselves up with other people's expectation about how we should be perfect. And then those things get ingrained in us as a child, and then it keeps building and building. And we have these certain expectations. Here in America, you always hear, oh, well, you aspire to the American dream. What is the American dream now? It's not going to be the cookie cutter that you grew up with. And that's the thing. You have to get beyond that perfectionism, and then forgive yourself for not having what other people thought you should have. Forgive yourself for the choices you made. Maybe you screwed up, and that's okay, but you have to be willing to forgive yourself. And I mean, there are times when I openly admit that I am my own worst critic and I don't forgive myself enough. But it's a lesson that I am learning. And I think forgiveness is very important. I can forgive others way more easily than I forgive myself. But that's because I hold myself to a higher standard.
Now, it's so important that we learn to forgive ourselves, because we just carry that stuff. It gets into our subconscious and it haunts us later. So we need to free ourselves from that.
As that song said a long time ago, free your mind and the rest will follow. So it's been a delight talking to you. Is there anything you would like to add?
I always say, and I'll just do this, I always say to everybody, you need to learn how to fly free.
Nice. And did your book help you fly free?
The forgiveness helped me fly free. It was the forgiveness that let me free. It really was. So,
well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you some great success with your book and your TED Talk, because I know you have a TED Talk as well.
Thank you. And I'm writing another book.
Oh, are you? What is it going to be about?
Well, this is also a memoir, but it is a book of short stories of my life. All my accidents and mishap and mayhem that I've experienced in my life.
Well, once you have that ready, you must come back and talk to us about that, because I'm sure you have some interesting stories.
I do.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Donna. It's been great chatting to you. Go well.
It's been great talking to you. It was a really good conversation with Lois, and I appreciate her time. Her book is Walking Without Skin, a journey of healing from fear to forgiveness to freedom. And I think that all of us need to forgive ourselves. We talked about that at the very end of the podcast, about forgiving ourselves. And it's something that we don't always do. We hold ourselves to a higher standard in some cases. The other thing about the podcast, or this episode of the podcast, that I want to go over a little bit too, is about the fact that, yes, I did say that women are capable of rape. And while some people may disagree, a woman can use her power to ascertain some things. Granted, it happens more often with men, but some women have done it. And I'm not saying that it's right on either party. I think rape is something that is all about power, and that needs to be abolished as much as we can. And healing is a very important thing. However you deal with your trauma, whether it be childhood trauma, rape, incest, whatever it is. I mean, it can be simply war. It can be your parents breaking up. There are so many traumas that we go through. It can be the bully that attacked you at school. However it is, it's time to find forgiveness and to heal yourself. And I know that's a hard thing sometimes, but it's an important thing. So reach out to get help if you need it. It's important, because ultimately, as Lois showed us at the very end, when you forgive yourself, you find freedom. If you want to follow the podcast, you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Better2 Podcast. We also have a website now, better2podcast.com. If you want to follow me, it's dmneedom.com, and all my social links are on the page. So I thank you as always for tuning in, and I greatly appreciate it. So I hope you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day whenever you're listening, and catch you next time, guys. Bye. The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio Productions.